I think I know, just intuitively, that it is wrong to kill, to steal. Do I need a book to tell me this? The question is, what exactly is the function of a holy book, like the Torah in our case? People say that you need God to tell you that it's wrong to do this or it's right to do that, otherwise it's not right or wrong. But there are others who say, no, you can just intuitively know this, and we sort of almost feel that. So do we really need the Torah to tell us how to be good people? And do we need an authority to tell us what we intuitively know to be good or bad?
It's a good question and a difficult one, and there's a lot to say on the topic. But broadly speaking, just to try and capture the idea in a few moments. First of all, Judaism does believe in morality, in absolute morality. It believes there are things that are wrong and right, and it believes that humans can access these things even without revelation, even without the giving of the Torah or some divinely given command. I mean, in fact, Judaism has expectations on humans, whether they are aware of the existence of the Torah or not. Judaism has expectations on human behavior pre the giving of the Torah, pre the revelation at Sinai. Judaism criticized the generation of the flood for its treatment of each other as human beings. Pharaoh was wrong to enslave the Jewish people, whether he was aware of God as a giver of Torah or not. In fact, it took place before the giving of the Torah. So Judaism absolutely believes that there is a moral sense that we humans have, and that there is an absolute wrong and right that's out there, that exists. Now,
but are we accountable for it because we have that moral sense within us?
And we are therefore accountable to...
Because we have the moral sense?
Yes, we are accountable and expected to live up to certain moral standards. Now...
Does that mean we must all have the same moral senses?
Clearly, humans can disagree about these moral standards, and they can debate it, in the same way as there may be an absolute truth about scientific reality, whether the moon is made of cheese or not is a scientific fact, even though the ability of humans to access that truth may, at least at certain periods in human history, be limited. Mm-hmm. So you can have debate about all sorts of issues in science. People can vigorously debate and bring evidence either way as to whether the world is flat or not, and they may not have had the ability to determine the answer to that at certain points in human history, but there was an absolute reality out there nonetheless. And therefore we would look at the various moral debates that we question and that we argue over, and would say there's a lot of things about which we are unclear in terms of the moral arena, and nonetheless there are, at least in some situations, perhaps answers. It doesn't mean every situation is a clear-cut moral answer, but at least in principle, some moral situations have moral answers, whether we are easily able to access it or not. And we can strive and reach towards the truth. And sometimes reaching towards the truth can take generations of debate and controversy within the world of philosophy or the world of ethics and morality. But that doesn't mean to say that we're not capable as humans sometimes to achieve an answer upon which we would agree. So this is point number one. I think that Judaism does recognize that and validates that. It's partly actually because there can be moral conundrums and moral questions which aren't always so clear, and it's not always so easy to find the answer, that we do need revelation. Sometimes there's a need for revelation to give us clarity as to the way to deal with a particular situation. Right. And sometimes there could be moral aspects and dimensions which aren't accessible to human intuition and to human insight and to human reflection. And this is where the world of spirituality comes from. So broadly speaking, we can look at certain of the mitzvot and certain of the halachot in the Torah and say that they're accessible, they're reasonable, our reason can access them and see the utility and morality inherent in them, such as murder and theft and other such matters. And then there can be ones which we call chok, we label as the areas of mitzvot where we don't necessarily understand the spiritual moral dimension to them, and yet nonetheless God has revealed to us that this is something of importance and something of moral morality inherent in this, and an aspect of a human development and the spiritual flourishing of a human being that's important in this commandment, in this mitzvah. I would also add that sometimes even the areas of more intuitive, obvious morality, such as murder or theft, one can push the question to the boundaries, and again, human intuition and human insight can break down. And because of that, we have the various debates over the end of life issues, or the beginning of life, the debate and controversy about which stage a fetus becomes a human life, the debate and controversy over which stage is the ends of human life, and therefore one can push moral dilemmas. One can think of moral scenarios in which you need to make a weighting between the value of human life versus other human needs, the various questions over the ethics of warfare, the ethics of using one life in order to save another life or many other lives. So one can push also the boundaries, and again, this is where revelation and halacha becomes important.
Fine, I accept all that, but the basic idea of, let's say, do not kill, unnecessarily. Do we need a book to tell us that?
In Jewish thinking, the answer is no, we don't need a book to tell us that. There's an
why does it?
There's an added dimension in us being told so by God, because in so doing, we're not just respecting other human life because of the value within other humans, but we're also respecting the God-given element of human life, the fact that all of humans are created in the image of God. And therefore, someone shouldn't murder because they respect and recognize and value the humanity of another human being, and they also shouldn't murder because God has said not to murder, because every human being is a divine creature in their own right, carries within them the image of God. And therefore, there's another layer that's added by the additional commandment that's given.
When people say the only thing that makes it, so you get some religious people, certainly Christian people, you'll get some Christian people that will say that the only way that you can say that it's wrong to murder can be if you say that there's a God who said it's wrong. So you're saying that actually we don't necessarily need that. The evidence being that Judaism says that before the Torah was given, people were held to account for these things. And so you're just saying and we're held to account for that because we have the sort of the book within us that says that this is wrong. But the added dimension is God saying it, and it brings a new element to the command.
I'm not an expert in Christian theology, so I can't comment on that. I can say within Judaism, though, yes, that's correct. We believe there's a moral dimension beyond the instruction of God at Sinai, the revelation of God. In fact, in many ways, you can turn it on its head. Part of the reason we need to listen, why ought we to listen to that which God commands, is because of the moral element that's there. We owe God, one of the reasons for needing to listen to God is we owe God as the creator, the one who's given us the gifts of life and our whole existence in the world within which we live, and therefore there's a dimension of morality within this. Let me make this a little bit clearer. We often look at different societies and we see seemingly radically different moral codes. That can perhaps lead us to question whether indeed there's agreement over even the premises of morality at all. I would argue, though, that when we probe more deeply, very often they share. There's a commonality between the basic premises of morality and simply their understanding the world in a different way. So, for example, we look at a society, some of the Central American civilizations that existed before the Spanish conquest. So they would engage in child sacrifice. And you could look at that and seemingly say, well, clearly these are people who don't value human life in the same way as we do. And there may indeed be slight differences in the degree of value they place on human life. But at core, it's coming from a different understanding of the reality of the world, scientific reality of how the world operates. Because if you believe, as they believed, that the sun isn't going to rise every day unless you slaughter a child in honor of the god, then maybe you can justify this morally. Not because you have a different moral code, but because you believe this is the only thing you can do in order to save the rest of everyone else's lives.
Right.
So sometimes the reality of how we see, the scientific reality of how we understand the world, will affect the application of the same shared moral principles. Look, we live in a society in which we believe it's justified to allow a qualified human being to take a scalpel and cut open another human being, a child, in order to save their lives in a medical procedure.
Right.
If one day it turns out that we're mistaken about all our medical assumptions, vanishingly unlikely as it is, then it will turn out that which we did was wrong. But that won't be because we had a different moral sense. So this new civilization has arisen that understands that actually doing operations is wrong. It's simply an application of the same moral principles to our understanding of the scientific reality of the world, which therefore justifies operating on a child, causing a child pain, because such pain isn't needless pain. Causing a child needless pain is morally wrong.
Right.
Causing a child pain in order to save their life is morally appropriate.
But aren't there instances, for example, recently we've seen with Nazism, that you have societies that are actually saying, we want to banish our moral intuition.
A person can choose to ignore their moral voice.
Right.
But Judaism places a trust in human beings.
That it's there.
A trust that there is a moral voice. You can choose to ignore it. And we all, by the way, we don't need to go as extreme as Nazism. And sometimes going extreme makes us miss a profound moral truth. Because we all experience this on a daily basis. The time when we're lying there, lazily playing on our phones, and we're aware that there's someone who needs us around the house to do some help, but we choose to ignore that little voice that's saying, is this really right what you're doing? Shouldn't you get off and do something? Yeah. So we all engage in the experience of choosing to ignore our moral voice. The fact that we can ignore the moral, I want to use that line, but we can choose to ignore the moral voice inside us. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
The other point to mention, and I suppose this is a part of the element of the need for revelation, is we need to ensure that we've considered all the moral dimensions within which we operate. So for example, if I said to you about someone there, a great citizen, they're a good father, a good spouse, a good husband, great brother. does that make them a good person? And the answer would be, well, have I checked through that they've covered, they've ticked all the moral boxes? Maybe they're great and good in all these respects, but they're not a good son. So Judaism, again, is making a claim. You can be a good person, you can be a moral person in all sorts of dimensions, but one of the relationships that's important to us and that we need to acknowledge is the relationship with God. And therefore, part of being a good and moral person, again, is to take into account that relationship. The fact and how you understand the world will influence the sort of moral decisions you take. And therefore, revelation, which is part of the source of our knowledge that there is a God, and the fact that this God cares about some of the things we do as human beings, and again, it's a deeper discussion about why he cares, that itself influences the moral equation, and therefore makes that part of what is necessary for us to be moral human beings. We need to be good sons, good spouses, good parents, but also good and obedience in our relationship with God. That's part of what it means to be a good person.
To stay up to date with the latest JTV content, if you're on YouTube, click subscribe below the video and the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click see first.